When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject, Tracers. User, 88Sarge. Posted, June 21st, 1997.
Every time I close my eyes, I see the same thing. Red tracer rounds arcing out into the desert night, lighting up pitted black skulls, their eyes bright with hunger. Giants whose 4 long limbs skitter like overgrown spiders over the dry ground, their screams cutting through the dark long after we've beat them back underground. Those are the dreams I have that make me long for nightmares instead, because nightmares aren't real. Those things I see very much are. The Palo Verde Fire Team, or PVFT, was established in the late 50s after the first tunneler night siege took an entire nuclear power generation facility offline. Back then, no one knew what they were dealing with. How could they? Every single thought around enriched uranium had to do with the nation's enemies wanting to get a piece of it. It never occurred to anyone that this brand new fuel wasn't the only thing to come out of the nuclear age, or I guess more accurately, that this shiny new technology could lure something very old out into the world. Seismic detects them first. That's a unit based in a concrete bunker at the AO's southwestern edge, facing Signal Mountain. They monitor for microtremors, which signal the initial stages of a tunneler approach. Once the bunker boys sound an alarm, Fire Team A responds to the projected emergence site in LAVs equipped with Browning M2s. Time and experience have proven that unless you can hit them in their eyes or open mouths, anything smaller than a 50 cal round just pisses them off. Underground, we can control the tunnelers to a degree, direct their approach, but once they breach, ordnance is all that stands between you and them. How we can direct them underground is both simple and complicated. Simple because all it took was a series of copper pillars sunken around the site's perimeter. They either can't or won't go past them. The why of it is the complicated part and goes back to the question of what the tunnelers are, which no one has really been able to answer. From what I've heard around the campfire, after that first siege, a long series of conversations between brass and the few witnesses who lived through the attack led to a consultation with elders from the nearby Gila River Reservation. Though the creatures described by survivors bore no relation to anything in their lore, the elders suggested burying copper talismans, which they claimed could disrupt the routes of wandering spirits. Higher-ups thought it was bullshit. Whatever these things were, they weren't ghosts, but after a second emergence within the site, during which tunnelers devoured fully a third of the stockpiled fissile material. Trying anything was deemed preferable to doing nothing. To everyone's surprise, the copper pillars worked, allowing the military to better dictate the rules of engagement. That doesn't mean we can control every conflict. You can't account for every variable on the battlefield, especially when you're fighting against an enemy you don't fully understand. If ever any of the men had forgotten that simple fact, last night was a brutal reminder. I fully admit, we'd gotten a little complacent. The last tunneler attack had been on Boxing Day, a quick, half-hour-long dust-up with 0 casualties on either side. Since then, the bunker boys hadn't seen hide nor hair of them. It was the longest gap between emergencies since I joined the PVFT in '88, and in retrospect, we should have guessed something was brewing. We certainly shouldn't have allowed Fire Team C to be taken off active alert. Heads up came just after 2 a.m. The call from the bunker, micro tremors in the direction of Signal Mountain. Fire Team A, myself, Alvarez, Cody, and Walker were out the door within 5 minutes. I was driving, Alvarez was on the 50 cal. We'd only made it 3 clicks out toward the area of engagement when seismic called in a second emergence, this one further east out toward Gillespie Volcano. Fire Team B was dispatched. As we got closer to the copper line, I could hear the tunnelers approaching, a frenzied sound like horses' hooves beating their way up from underground. Emergencies themselves are nightmarish things. The ground explodes, vomiting up what looks like giants with 2 long arms and legs, their faces a thin skin of black stretched over a huge skull. Towering above us, even in the LAV, the tunnelers really did look like huge spiders, just with half the legs and a lot more aggression. The second we hit the edge of our preserve, the dirt rippled in a kind of wave, then burst skyward, ear-splitting screeches followed as bony limbs pulled their oversized bodies out of the ground. Vasquez wheeled the 50 cal right, its sharp report almost as loud as its targets. The Humvee shook while tracers flashed through the dark ahead, rounds punching ragged holes through the creatures' torsos, cleaving skulls in half. Still, the tunnelers came hard, easily a dozen of them swarming toward us over top of the copper line, which could only contain them below ground. Vasquez was quickly overwhelmed, and one of the things thrust a skeletal appendage through his neck and out the back. I hit reverse, the engine whining as we pulled back, making space between us and the horde. Vasquez's still impaled body was ripped from the top of the lab, held aloft by the tunneler who had speared him. It almost seemed to be waving it in victory, something Cody and Walker couldn't help but notice as well. It pissed us off, so with Walker now manning the Browning, I gunned it toward the enemy, who seemed to be retreating. This was incredibly stupid because before I knew it, a thunderclap came from our left side and we were hit so hard the vehicle rolled. In the split second before we were upside down, I knew what had happened. The tunnelers had intentionally drawn us over the copper line, leading us into a trap. The second emergence had caught us completely by surprise, and now my whole body ached as blows rained down on the overturned lab. This was a small mercy. The PVFT had been a part of a pilot program where our light armored vehicles had additional plating added to their undercarriages. Eventually, when the next war came, this would be rolled out for use by U.S. combat personnel everywhere. Until then, we were their grateful guinea pigs. Tunneler strikes that would have shredded our lav now thudded into the additional armor. It was only a temporary reprieve, however, because we were way out over our skies with no backup. Walker had managed to keep himself intact during the flip, and I heard him call out, telling me he was in the process of trying to detach the 50 cal from its now broken mount. Next to me, Cody was groaning, but alive. I grabbed my AR and fired 3 bursts through the shattered driver's side window, at least some of the rounds striking true, judging by the roars outside. It wouldn't stop them, but it might slow them down slightly. More blind fire, a handful more hits. The armor strikes were coming fast and furious now. I tried the radio with no luck. The impact had knocked it offline entirely. It wasn't all bad news, though. As clever as the ambush had been, it showed the creatures weren't exactly intelligent. Overturning our vehicle had put us at an impossible angle for their rigid limbs to reach us. With a thud, the now detached 50 cal fell onto the dirt. Decision time. It was the only thing which could really hurt them, but operating it free of a mount was a 3-man operation. A gunner, a carrier, and an ammo bearer. We had the numbers, but leaving our position was suicide. Suddenly, the roar of tunnelers was drowned out by the barking 50 cal. Walker was operating it from its position on the ground. The noise was deafening, and immediately my ears felt as if they were packed with cotton wool. I barely heard the cries of our enemies, as those dumb enough to wander into the gun's narrow range of fire were cut off at what amounted to their knees. The new round of bloodshed put a scare into the opposition, and they backed off. Not much, but enough to give us breathing room. Cody had fully come around by this point, and I asked if he was strong enough to be ammo bearer if we decided to make a break for it. He agreed that he was. I looked to Walker, who had turned away from scanning the gap between the lav and the earth, and he nodded. With a grunt, I heaved myself through the broken glass around me to the back of the lav. Walker let out another burst, then pushed the Browning ahead of him, scurrying after it. He never saw the blow coming. A tunneler who had been waiting above us for just such an opportunity. Walker was swiftly pulled out of view, the entrails dislodged by the attack remaining behind to stain the sand red. That was it. Without 3 people to operate the 50 cal, we were fucked. I think the tunnelers knew it too, because even with my damaged eardrums, I could hear the heavy thumping of their approach. I again blindly fired my AR, 3 bursts that hit home but ultimately did nothing. Adrenaline had my heart pumping so hard the reality of death couldn't set in, even as the disgusting fuckers outside began ramming the overturned lav in an attempt to get at us. All I could think about was getting one last chance to put a round into one of their eyes. Another roar, this one distant. All around us, the night exploded into a brilliant white. Moments later, and the tunnelers were shrieking louder than ever before, some of them collapsing to the earth, entering my eye line just ahead of the smell of garlic. White phosphorus. We had air support. WP is a highly caustic substance used by the military for illumination. Ignited by oxygen and burning with all the fires of hell, Willie Pete will carve right through your skin and bone, something even those nightmares from underground are made of. Once we were evac'd by Fire Team C, we learned that B had gone through exactly what we had without the happy ending. Now, we begin a long, unhappy process of rebuilding because as long as there's nuclear material out there, the tunnelers will come for it. Progress doesn't come cheap.
Subject: The Floresville Miracle. User: 6GlowTX. Posted June 1st, 1999.
What does it say about a miracle if no one remembers it? Was it a mistake? What if one person holds on to the memory? Does it mean God forgot about them? Or was the miracle meant to tell them something? I've asked myself these questions almost every day since September 26, 1953, and still don't have an answer. It seems blasphemous to think God and all His glory would do something just for me, but how else to explain that of the thousands of people to see the Floresville miracle, I'm the only one who hasn't forgotten? Nowadays, when people talk about miraculous events in Wilson County in 1953, they're talking about the rains that saved our peanut crop from what had been months of drought. That was a gift, to be sure, because it meant economic life or death for our town, but drought wasn't exactly uncommon in Texas in those days, or ever, and it's not what I'm talking about. I haven't lived in Floresville in many years, but I fondly remember the Peanut Festival. It always happened in late September and meant we'd get an extra day off school the Friday, so us kids got to be a part of the big, mile-long parade. That year, it all kicked off with a ceremony where Mr. Ford, the owner of the newspaper, gave a big Texas hat to the head of the National Peanut Council who'd come down from Washington. I was a small, wiry kid who was good at working his way to the front of the crowd, so I got to see the government man try to accept the hat graciously, even though he looked like a horse's ass and we all knew it. The rest of that first day is a blur, the way most childhood memories are. I remember downtown Floresville wreathed in green peanut vines, the Arcadia Theater showing a free picture all day, and the rich fragrance of peanut oil drifting over it all. In the evening, we watched our Tigers beat the Karn City Badgers on the back of Johnny Sims rushing 200 yards. People used to say Johnny would have gone pro if he hadn't liked drinking so much. He ended up tending bar at Lucy's place till the night he was driving home with a skin full of booze and plowed straight into a cow that had found its way onto the road. The next day's festivities were centered around the new gym at the high school with square dancers, a model airplane show, and what all. The square dancers had come from San Antonio, and boy could they move, each of them in perfect precision, like clockwork, the women's gingham dresses whirling. As the sun made its way to the horizon, revelry gave way to ceremony, and it was announced that the king and queen of the festival would be crowned. I don't recall who the king was, no one ever did. Kings, even minor ones like at the Floresville Peanut Festival, were all forgotten or despised, but a queen lives forever in your heart. That year, our queen was Betty Jean Blake, Dr. and Mrs. Blake's daughter, and she was a vision, the prettiest girl my 8-year-old eyes had ever seen. She wore a long white dress embroidered with golden accents, and even in the soft light of the gymnasium, glowed like a star in the sky. The crowd, which had to be more than 1,000 people, hushed right down as Miss Betty made her way to the stage. Even Mr. Panabaker, the master of ceremonies, lost himself a bit and mumbled his words at the start of his speech, but I don't think anyone really noticed. The crown had just about touched Mrs. Betty's head when the commotion started. The first thing I noticed was the hair on my arm standing up, followed by a deep vibration in my chest. I never felt anything like it, and I don't mind telling you, it scared me. A second or two later, I started hearing people around me talking about feeling funny, and I looked back to see a lot of hands clutching chests or mopping brows. Next, the ground started rumbling, and I felt the bleachers where we were sitting sway a little, like a big freight train was passing by. Only problem with that was, we weren't anywhere near a rail line. Folks started to panic, and Mr. Painbreaker tried to get it under control, telling the crowd to file calmly outside. It's a measure of Floresville's character that everyone did as they were told, give or take some people who had gotten themselves so worked up at the idea of a commie attack that they couldn't do much apart from wringing their hands. 1,000 people spilled out into the schoolyard where the scheduled street dance led by the Texas Plainsmen had been in full swing before the rumbling began. Again, given the sheer volume of people, you'd expect some manner of calamity, but most everyone conducted themselves with the grace and calm you'd expect of Texans under duress. As the gathered crowd tried to make sense of what they were experiencing, I heard everything from tornado weather to earthquake to more of the red plot kind of stuff. I found myself looking upward to a point of light high in the sky above the football field. At first, it was one point of thousands in the night sky, so I don't know exactly how I came to fixate on it, but it soon grew from a pinprick to a softball that glowed even more than Miss Betty had. One by one, the others noticed it too, until everyone there was gazing upward, watching a ball of light expand as it got closer to us till it was bigger than the Wiseman house over on 3rd Street. The orb slowed as it got within feet of the football field, shining so brightly you could scarcely look at it. We all, to a man, used our hands to shade our eyes while still trying to see what exactly had touched down in our little town. Its surface was glassy but rippled like it was always moving. Within that outer shell was the light itself, a brilliant, pure white, pulsating to a rhythm we couldn't hear or feel. When the liquid glass exterior of the orb touched down onto the grass of the football field, the rumbling stopped, and in its place, a quiet fell. My parents looked at one another, unsure of what was expected of them, and I could see many others going through the same experience. As for me, I felt an internal peace, unlike any I'd known before or have felt since. A calm that allowed me to hear a voice. Well, not a voice exactly, but in my heart, I knew that this strange, beautiful creature was speaking to me. It told me to come closer. It wasn't hard to slide through the crowd of onlookers, each of them frozen in a mix of fear, confusion, and awe. I remember their clothes brushing over my skin as I squeezed past, as if each person was giving me a secret blessing. In just a few moments, I had pushed my way to the front of the crowd at the edge of the football field, less than 100 feet away from the visitor. The pulses of its inner light were steady now, almost matching the beat of my heart. The closer I got, the more sure I was that I needed to make contact, to touch it and connect my world with whatever one it had come from, be it heaven or Krypton. There were murmurs from the crowd behind me as I stepped further into the field, but no one made a move to stop me. Strangely, with each step nearer to the light, it became more bearable, and I had to protect my eyes less. Once I was within arm's reach of its surface, I didn't need to shade myself at all and could see not just through the light, but inside it to what it truly was. There are no words in any language I know to fully describe what I saw that night. The scope of it was bigger than my 8-year-old brain, or my present one, come to think. The ball was both living and not, a sentient thing that also acted as a doorway between here and places you can't imagine. Through its heart, I gazed into infinity, where a million possible worlds intersected and wrapped around each other, an endlessly faceted diamond that had no beginning and no end. I felt both total awe at the beauty of its elegance and terror at how insignificant I felt in the face of it all. With a sound like breaking glass, the vision ended. I became aware I was crying. The ground began to rumble again as the orb began its ascent, static electricity tugging at my body. Higher and higher it rose until finally it disappeared into the sky, into the everywhere and nowhere it had shown me. I wiped the tears from my face and turned back to the crowd, only to realize they weren't there. Somehow, without me ever noticing it, the entire town had disassembled and gone, leaving me there with that strange emissary from another world. When I got home, my father was reading Friday's paper and my mother was listening to the radio. Neither of them asked where I'd been or expressed a single shred of interest in the extraordinary events to which we'd all been witness. When I pressed them on it, they professed ignorance and said they'd enjoyed the coronation very much, but decided to skip the dance as they'd been up late the night before. In the days to come, I would hear this story repeated over and over. There wasn't a single resident of Floresville I spoke to who had any memory of what had happened, but they all insisted they'd had a lovely time. The part of me that was still an 8-year-old boy wanted to believe he was the subject of a cruel prank on the part of the whole town, but deep inside, I knew that wasn't it. Seeing into the light had forced a kind of maturity on me, and I couldn't hold on to any childish notion for long. I just wish I knew what I traded that childhood away for.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.